obsessed, got me obsessed, got me obsessed.
What's going on, boys and girls? Welcome back to FEEKI Flips, the most dumbed down real estate channel on all of YouTube, because if I can make money doing this, then so can you. We are back today with part 3 of the video saga that nobody asked for. Video number 1 was how to dispo your wholesale deals. Then we backtracked for video number 2 on more info on how to find those deals to sell. Now this video, I'm going to go into detail on what you actually have to deal with on a pretty regular basis trying to sell some of these deals. So today is Sunday, and I will take you guys through details on a deal that we just closed last week on Friday. And before we get into those specific details, we'll go through 3 things that we deal with all the time on just about every deal that we do. But first, Coco was very sad that she wasn't included in last week's video, so update on her. Same shit, different day. All right, guys, so the first thing that we deal with on every single deal that we do is motivated sellers. If you guys caught last week's video, I went into detail on how to find those motivated sellers, but that's one thing that new people miss a lot is emphasis on the word motivated. We're not looking for people that just, yeah, I want to sell my house. There has to be 2, 3, 4, 5 layers of motivation underneath that for it to make sense for the seller to take a discounted cash offer on their property. Second thing that we deal with on every single deal is we provide the easy button to the seller in a real estate transaction. That is what the cash offer is. It's not just cash. There are a lot of other things that come with an off-market offer from an investor that really do make it the easy button as far as a real estate transaction goes. So that is what we're offering the seller, and that's what they get in exchange for taking a discounted cash offer. The third thing that we deal with all the time is elderly people. So you can see how all 3 of these things, motivated sellers, the easy button, and elderly people, often work together, and that's why we end up dealing with this stuff on almost every single deal that we do. Now, I brought those 3 things up because the deal we're about to talk about does have the trifecta of all 3 of those things. So the first issue that we dealt with getting this deal to the finish line was just the type of property that it was. When you're flipping or wholesaling, but specifically with this deal because we did wholesale it, there are types of property that are much easier to wholesale than others. So this specific house was an older manufactured home. It needed a heavy lift, and it was a moved manufactured. So I could do a 17-part series on manufactured homes because they're very nuanced, and there's a lot of little kind of, some of it's legal and some of it's just like details that you need to know when you're doing manufactured homes. But this one kind of hit almost everything that's like we don't want with a manufactured home, with the exception of that it was on land and not in a park. But it was a 1977, it was destroyed, and it had been moved from a prior location. Those 3 things make this deal very hard to dispo no matter what, compared to other types of homes that might be like a 1992 stick-built single-family house that's just like a paint and carpet type rehab. That deal is gonna be fucking way easier to sell than this thing every day of the week. The second issue that we dealt with on this deal was just the seller in general. Not that he was an issue, but just because of these things that I'm about to list off. The first issue was because he was elderly, he just didn't have access to the internet, and that happens to us quite often. So he had to wet ink everything. And this property is like 30 or 45 minutes away from our office here in Reno. So anytime we had to get something signed by him, we couldn't docu-sign it to him. We would have to drive all the way out to the property and get his signature on it. And by we, I mean our acquisition manager, Kyle. I'm not going to take credit for any of this. The second thing was just a language barrier. He was foreign, and he did speak English, and like he would definitely understand what you were trying to say to him. But it was just, you know, it adds that other level of complexity to the deal when there is a language barrier there, because you have to talk super slow to him, or you might have to explain things, you know, many times before he understands what you're trying to say. The third issue we had here was vehicles being left on site. So back to the easy button in real estate. One thing that we do for sellers all the time is basically you can take whatever you want and leave the rest of the stuff for us. We just need to know kind of how much personal property that they're going to leave behind so you can factor it into your numbers for a trash out. So something like that, especially with the type of homes that we deal with pretty regularly, it's never going to happen in a retail transaction when you list it on the market, especially if the home's in financeable condition where a retail buyer would want it and it's not just going to be straight investor cash offers anyway. So that's something that sellers like, especially elderly sellers, because when they're downsizing, just like this guy was, he doesn't want to take all this stuff, nor could he, because he's moving into a small apartment and he's got a house full of stuff and a yard full of stuff. So really that's his only option. He doesn't, obviously he's elderly, so he doesn't have, like the capacity to move all of this stuff himself or take it to the dump or get a dumpster or anything like that. That's really a great pitch that you guys can give to the sellers when you're on appointments with them, is that just take whatever you want to the new place and leave everything else behind. That being said, the one caveat to that is vehicles. And out in rural Nevada, when a lot of the houses that we're dealing with, people accrue vehicles over time, however that may happen. And that's one thing that they might be difficult to get rid of. So he had 3 cars. He was only taking one of them. So he asked us to sell the other 2 cars for him, which we've done before. And again, since he can't use the internet, we're like, yeah, no problem. We'll take photos of them. We'll put them on Craigslist and we'll sell them for you. The next issue with this deal was moving. So again, just because he was downsizing, he was staying local, but he didn't have any family around and he just needed a lot of help because he was elderly, no internet, all that stuff, getting into a new place. And moving is always an issue when you're dealing with owner-occupied property and they have somewhere to go. I shouldn't say always, but more often than not, it becomes an issue because there's just a lot of moving parts when either they're trying to buy another house or they're moving out of state or they're just moving into an apartment locally like he was. It's a lot of things going on for the seller, and you as the wholesaler or the buyer, if you're going to flip, you really need to kind of facilitate all that stuff for them, because if you don't, the deals will never close and you'll be down to the last day of closing or last day of your due diligence or whatever. And what you will find 100% is that the seller has not made any progress on their own for whatever their plan was. So you really have to like step up and be on top of it and help them out in any way possible. So one issue that the seller usually has when they're moving is the financial part of things. More often than not, the seller does not have the money that they need to move without selling this home first. So again, off-market cash offer from an investor. This is another thing that you can provide for the seller, is something called a holdback. So real quick, just explaining what that is. Basically, we're going to fund the deal. We're going to buy the house from them, but we're going to hold back $5,000 in escrow and then give them another week to move out. So this works for all parties because 1, we buy the house on time. 2, they get all of their proceeds except for $5,000. And 3, it protects us as the buyer, because the last thing that we want to do is close on the property. The seller says, yeah, bro, totally, I'm going to move out. And then 4 days from now, we figure out that the seller has now turned into a squatter, and then you have a 90-day eviction on your hands, or longer if you're in a liberal state. So when we signed this deal, he said, no, that's not going to be necessary. I can be out of here at closing. As we got farther through the deal, that it became apparent that that wasn't going to happen and we needed a holdback. So, a little bit more nuance when you're wholesaling the deal, because now you're not going to actually be the buyer. I've already assigned this deal. So basically, I need to get the okay from the end buyer for anything that we discuss with the seller, because it's his deal. So I cannot say, yeah, sure, no problem, we'll give you a holdback if I haven't run it by the buyer. So I gave the buyer the situation, and of course, he wanted a holdback, as I expected. But the issue, because the seller could not wet ink anything, just to get a signature on the holdback, we would have had to drive all the way out there just to get one signature, and then also explain the holdback to him, language barrier, all that type of stuff. It's like changing the transaction kind of, when it really is not that necessary, because he only needed a holdback for like a day. He just wanted the funds, and then he was going to move out basically the next day. So what I volunteered to do was do the holdback out of our assignment fee. So it worked exactly the same, but instead of $5,000 being held back from the buyer's proceeds, $5,000 was held back from our proceeds at closings. So transaction was exactly the same for the seller. We got to close him a day early and then move him out the next day. For the buyer, he got the holdback that protected him, and then we just had to sacrifice getting half of our assignment fee, for a couple days until it was confirmed vacant. So probably the biggest issue with this deal was just the move out in general, and huge shout out to our acquisition manager, Kyle, for dealing with all of this for the seller. seller because, like I've said, the seller really couldn't facilitate all of this on his own. He probably could have, but it would have just been a lot for him to do, especially with his situation and all that. So Kyle basically handled everything for the seller as far as his move out. He told Kyle, like, I want a studio apartment in Reno Sparks area. It doesn't really matter where. So Kyle went and found him an apartment. Kyle, he really went above and beyond for the seller. So once he got closer to actually getting him in an apartment, he's calling around apartments. He knows exactly what the seller's income is because he's on Social Security. So it's like, no, we can't get him in this place because he doesn't make enough money. No, this one's not going to work because of XYZ. So he found a place that verbally they're like, yeah, that should work. You just need to, have him come down here, get him approved. And from the Social Security office, he needs a letter of whatever, I guess, to prove his income. So the reason why Kyle really went above and beyond, one day a couple weeks ago, he drove way out to the property. He picked up the seller. He took him down to the Social Security office here in town, got this letter after like a 2 or 3 hour wait in line, drove him over to the apartment so he could sit there and apply and do all that. We paid cash for his application fee. It was like $45 or something like that. And then Kyle drove him all the way back home and made sure that he was like approved and ready to go for this apartment. Further than that, other things that the apartment needed was renter's insurance. So we found out who his auto insurance was through and then got him on, the renter's insurance that the apartment needed. And then other than that, they also need, the first month's rent when he moved in. Luckily, I think through his income or something, he qualified so he didn't need to provide like a deposit of sorts. It was just the prorated first month's rent. But the issue with that was it had to be in the form of a cashier's check. So again, now because half of our assignment fee is riding on all of these things lining up and him actually getting moved out on the day he said he wanted to and all of that, we just said, hey, this is what we're going to do, Mr. Seller. We're going to do the cashier's check for you. And that way, I can go to the bank, get a cashier's check in the right amount and bring it over to the apartment, make sure that goes off without a hitch. And then he's going to pay us back through closing, out of his proceeds for the same amount. So again, it's the same for him. It's just a little bit easier for him so he doesn't have to do anything. But then also, like, the last thing we want to do is have the buyer actually close on this house. The next day he's supposed to move out and he gets to the apartments and the cashier's check is like in the wrong amount, or he brought a personal check or something like that. Then the banks are closed because it's Saturday, all that stuff. So we just said, you know what, we're going to go ahead and take care of all this for him. And then the last thing with moving was actually setting up movers for him. So he wasn't taking all that much stuff. So we hired actually one of our handyman crews to go out and move him for him. And again, because half of our assignment fee is riding on this, we need to make sure that this is all lined up and this is going to happen. So we actually hired and paid for the movers to go out there. And then he just showed them around the house and said, take this, take this, take this. They took everything that he wanted, left everything else for the buyer, and then drove him over to the new apartment, dropped him off, got him all moved in. So now we know that everything, it's not possible. All this stuff goes right. It's not possible that the seller is still in the house come Monday when we told the buyer is going to be vacant. And then now we're in a fight with the buyer to try to get half of our assignment fee back. So the last issue that we dealt with, and I'm going to cut in some baller footage right here, is selling these vehicles. So like I said, we had 2 vehicles that we needed to sell. One of them ran and drove and had a title. One of them was you would need a tow truck or a trailer to come get it, and it had no title. So, we're trying to sell these for the seller. We knew that he would take $1,000 for both of them. And again, that's just like, all right, so now we have to do all this extra stuff just to get this thing to the finish line. And now we're relying on other people. Timeline's coming up. So what we did, an agent in town, shout out to Richard Berman, he told me about this towing company that would come get the vehicle for free that didn't have a title, and then the other one we could sell pretty easily. So we just ended up buying this vehicle from the seller for $1,000, sitting right outside here at the office right now. So now we can just sell that whenever we have time. We don't have to worry about timelines. And then the vehicle is scheduled to get picked up on Monday from the towing company, the one that we weren't going to be able to sell because it didn't have a title. But again, Kyle and I drove all the way out there late last week just to pick up this one car so we could make sure that we closed on time and the property is truly vacant come Monday, so we're not going back on our agreement that we made with the buyer. So that's about it, guys. I just wanted to run through some details with you on kind of how we go above and beyond for the seller pretty regularly on some of these deals, and every single deal is different. Obviously we're not doing this exact sequence of things on every deal, but we do have, I think, 3 or 4 right now where we're dealing with very very similar issues with the seller. It's owner occupied and they need to find a place to go. So this type of stuff happens all the time. Just something to keep in mind when you are, either flipping or wholesaling off market, and you are, or you at least should be, truly providing the easy button to the seller by doing all this extra stuff for them. So thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you're new here. Smash that like button, help us out with the YouTube algorithm, and I will see you on the next episode.